So nice to see you all. Thank you for joining again. Welcome to the World Rainforest Day Summit. Today we're going to be discussing restoration and rewilding. So I hope people are slowly tuning in from different parts of the world. Good morning to everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening for some. Thank you, Lívia, Maria Jose, Amy. I know you're all coming from different parts of the world. Fortunately, we're at least all in the same hemisphere this time. So that makes things easier. Maria Jose is joining us from Mexico City, I believe. Lívia, Sao Paulo. Okay. And Amy is currently in Colorado. So thank you, everyone. Today, we're really going to be discussing a little bit more than just conservation as we know. Protecting standing forests and existing ecosystems is just one approach to safeguarding our shared future on this planet. We also need to fix what's broken, what we've broken, to a certain extent. This session will take a deep dive into restoration, into rewilding, into different approaches from different sectors, very importantly, and really uncovering what ecosystem restoration looks like, how it works, and who is making it happen in this case. So I'd like to do some very, very quick introductions. If we can try and get 1 minute for each one of you to really tell a little bit about yourselves and where you come from and the organizations you're representing. I'd appreciate that. Go ahead. Maria Jose, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me here and so great to be with this panel. Hi, Lívia and Amy. Thank you, Tadzio, for the invitation. I am the Conservation Director for WWF Mexico. I also lead the Conservation Cabinet for Latin America, and I've been 5 years leading on our Jaguar conservation strategy. So very nice to be here. And over to Lívia.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you guys for inviting me, for inviting Lush to join. I'm responsible for the sourcing hub, the Latin America sourcing hub at Lush Cosmetics. Lush is a British cosmetic company that invents, manufactures, and retailers fresh handmade cosmetics. So I guess I'll bring a perspective, a company perspective to the debate here today. So I hope you enjoy.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Tadzio, for the invitation and to be on this panel with such distinguished professionals. So thank you. My name is Amy Lewis. I am the CEO of the Wild Foundation. And Wild is a conservation group that has been around since the 1970s. We actually started in South Africa. We had two co-founders, one who is an Indigenous elder. And so I think that our organization brings a slightly different ethic to our approach to conservation than a lot of groups, and we really look at cultural variables and start with those. And that's not to say that we don't engage science and technology. But our preferred approach is through culture, as we believe that culture is really the executive decision-making that drives societal actions and behaviors. And looking forward to the discussion today with the four of us.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for that. So the first subject I really want to go deeper into is the fact that a lot of people still today think that conservation is seen as a nature-only approach. We know it came a lot from the 70s, from the 80s. Still today, and I really want to speak to this to our audience, maybe outside our niche, to really help understand that there's much more to conservation, and only being nature-based, I'm going to say. So Amy, I'd like to go back to what you just mentioned. How does restoration, regeneration, these two new approaches, how do they depend or actually also overlap with the importance of human activity? Let's say social, environmental conservation in this sense. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So every landscape has a physical component and a non-physical component to it. And the physical component is obviously what we think about most with with conservation, the ecosystems, the biodiversity. The non-physical component are the attitudes and values that the human attitudes and values that overlay that landscape. And those have as much of an influence on the development of that landscape as geological forces or ecological forces. And for most of human history, the values, attitudes, and behaviors that overlaid those landscapes were essentially hunter-gatherer cultures. They were what we would call now traditional cultures. And it's only been in the last couple thousand years, and really since the Industrial Revolution, the last couple hundred, that our values, attitudes, and institutions overlaying the landscapes have changed so much that we have radically altered the face of the earth and the biosphere. And so one of the things that Wild looks at as we approach conserving the biosphere, yes, in discrete locations, but also globally, is what is the role of traditional culture in rewilding, and what can we as a contemporary society learn from and adopt from traditional cultures to sustain our restoration activities?
Thank you, Amy. Can you tell us just very quickly some of the examples of where you work, Amy? I think just to put people in context, that would be really
yeah,
great.
So Wild's area of expertise tends to be global policy. That being said, we do have a couple of on-the-ground projects. One of those is in West Africa, the Mali Elephant Project, where we work with local communities. The Mali Elephant Project is responsible for creating one of the world's largest terrestrial protected areas that also has approximately 400,000 people living in it. Another project that we have is in the Western Amazon, and it's a partnership with the Yawanawa people. And we're looking at how expanding their territorial claims, as well as preserving their traditional culture, and a couple of ecological interventions here and there can help not just protect the rainforest in that area, but provide wider protections throughout the region that they're in.
Thank you. Maria Jose, a lot of your work is Mexico and Latin America based. You see a lot of this overlap with human activity, a lot of these connections with the social side of things. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that within WWF, we are pushing forward a concept that you might all know called inclusive conservation. So what we do is that we have to acknowledge that almost a quarter of the earth belong to indigenous territories and communities, and that within that, they hold the most intact ecosystems are part of that. In a country such as Mexico, you cannot foresee conservation of nature without people. It's not as you can see it in other places that we know that it's been developed in a different way. But here you have to work side by side with the stewards of conservation. 90% of the territory in Mexico is owned by people. All the parks are owned by people. So if you don't manage to work with them, understand the culture, the knowledge that Amy is mentioning it's crucial. It's very hard, and you see why some of the strategies that we put forward on the 90s and in the 80s failed, and it's because it wasn't considering people. We have to be ready to acknowledge the rights, the knowledge, and the practices of them, and how do you incorporate that into the solutions. I have a couple of examples that I think are important to mention. We are working in the Copalita Basin in the Oaxaca state, where we have a strong governance of the communities, that this is another crucial part. How do you enable communities to actually be decision makers of their own natural resources? And how do they manage to provide for the well-being of their children and of their families? On that, we've been working 20 years on this basin with a watershed vision. So we're working from upper shed into the coast. And what we're doing is enabling or identifying the enabling conditions for them to be able to perform their livelihoods without harming nature. So we're building community enterprises that have a lot of challenges. We have to understand that being an entrepreneur in a place where you have severe challenges in digital access to education, it's severe. But we are seeing these entrepreneurships, particularly of young people and young generations, that are trying to make a change. The other piece I want to mention is the example of the Monarch Butterfly Reserve. We established there, together with other partners, a joint fund that helps people understand, the communities that were living there, that they weren't able to use the forest anymore. How do we transit and understand the needs that they have? So we've been working on this fund where we used to have massive amounts of deforestation. We have placed this fund. We're working with the community, sit on the committee, on the steering committee of this fund, and they understand how if they do not, if there is no deforestation, we have a payment for results, and that is used to whatever the community decides to use it, and this empowers them and has enabled to drop big numbers of deforestation almost to zero in 2012, 2013. So these are the kinds of things that help strong governance, understanding the needs and rights of communities, and understand that it's part of a big system. Over.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Lívia, most of what you do in sourcing, it means you actually source ethically, I'm going to say, from farmers and producers who practice regenerative agriculture. How do you identify these projects? What are the criterias, speaking from the private sector?
Yeah, listen to these two lovely ladies speaking. Just made me realize how important it is to have the private sector involved as well, in a way to buy ingredients, things that wouldn't harm the livelihoods of these communities, but they could actually supply, they could sell, and could give them a different source, source of income besides those traditional practices that they have. So just for you guys to have an idea, the hubs, they can work in very different ways and with different structures at Lush. So sometimes it's just a community-based project where we support the communities to set up distillation facilities, scaling up volumes, matching quality that the industry needs. Can be just partnering with a local supplier in order to support them to move into more regenerative practice. Could be a partner project where we partner with different NGOs and supporting groups. But sometimes we have our own projects as well, which is our Lush-owned business. We have a few entities around the world that belongs to Lush. So just for you guys to have an idea, we do own the rights of 2 forest concessions in Peru. We have land in Guatemala and in Uganda, where we are doing restoration work and where we are also trying to grow ingredients that can be used in our production. So these are kind of different ways that we can work within the hubs. But Lush has been working with this kind of projects for over 15 years now. So we have an amazing network of partners, and this kind of summits kind of get us connected with other amazing groups. So sometimes when we're looking for example, a specific ingredient for our production, we just have to activate that network, and our friends point us to amazing groups that are growing ingredients that are helping to restore the environment where they're based. It can happen in different ways. Sometimes it's just a group that is already supplying us with a specific ingredient, but they are based in a region of the world where another ingredient can be grown, and then we can actually add to their portfolio. We do have different giving streams, so that are not related to the supply chain. So Lush has the refund, the charity pot, the spring prize, and the Lush fund, which funds different projects around the world that are absolutely not related to our supply chain. But eventually those guys can actually produce something and they are interested in selling. So this is a kind of connection that we can have as well. And once we decide to support a group or a project, I guess that's the different thing about Lush. The projects will be tailor-made based on what that group, that regions, what they need and what they want to do. We want to make sure that we go at the community pace, making sure that they are ready and they're willing to receive larger investments and larger projects, that the community is 100% on board and in agreement with that. So we have different cases. We have groups that they just want to dry some beans, some seeds and deliver that, and that's fine. And we have groups that are not that far from the first one, but they're super willing to process oils, butters, try the first trials on QC analysis, and that's amazing as well. So we have to respect what each of them is willing to do and require their requirement, I guess.
So Lívia, I think you mentioned something that keeps on coming up. Yesterday during our session, a business session, for us to table, this came up as well, and I'm glad, because it's the importance of partnerships, right? It's all about understanding that we can't work by ourselves. That concept is far away from us today. So I'm super happy once again to see the three of you representing different approaches. But what do you think about this? What do you think about the necessity of these partnerships, whether it's private sector, whether it's with communities, NGOs, government? How do you see this on your day-to-day basis?
I guess that's what, for me, that's what I do. That's my main activity is actually connecting people. I don't know anything. I don't understand about anything. I just know people. So I know someone that's working on that region, and I know an exporter that could do the exporting of that seeds for those people that are not still able to export. So that's what I tell everybody. I don't have a huge experience on something. I just know the right people and I connect them. And I don't know, it's so, yeah, it fills me with joy to be able to do that. And Lush, if you look at Lush within the cosmetic industry, we're very tiny compared to other brands with other companies. So if we are not willing to make partnerships to have even a bigger impact, we wouldn't get anywhere. So yeah, that's my point of view.
Thank you. Thank you, Lívia. Amy, Maria Jose, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
No, definitely. I think that we have to work in partnerships, and everybody, it's an all-in strategy. The system is bigger than us, and if we don't manage to combine, sequence, and push forward, we're going to continue seeing this crisis on degradation. I think that there are certain obstacles and challenges in partnering. I think that in the case, for example, for NGOs, we still are looking ourselves sometimes as competition. I think that that is evolving, and I believe that this is also happening in how do you position as the private sector with some of our partners, is how do you position as the one company within your sector is like, no, you should be the champion to inspire the other ones to follow your footsteps, and you can be spear pointing on sustainability, but not because of you're trying to be the first one, but because it's part of the embedded integrating or mainstreaming biodiversity. And I just want to mention one thing talking about is listening to Lívia, and I love your approach. What we've seen is that we have communities that they just want to make a small living. They don't want to start like having the pressure of the commercializer asking them for coffee, and they just want to have what they need to be able to enjoy their lives with their families. And then you have others that are much more entrepreneurs, and I love that approach that you fund and you put the energy on and being very respectful of the will, because sometimes we try. There's an example of this community, the Tarahumara, that they used to be nomads in the Tarahumara Sierra, and with all these, they put a school and they put housing and they put everything, and they stopped being nomads, and now they're facing with challenges in terms of resources, and it's because it was a badly planned process that was aimed for good, but it turned another way. So I think it's very important to be mindful and respectful. We haven't talked a lot about restoration, but I think that maybe on this next segment we can talk a little bit more about that and rewilding. But over to Amy.
That's it's flowing. It's flowing. Let's let the conversation flow as words going. Amy,
I do want to jump in about the partnership topic with two comments. The first is that I think that there's an idea in our highly individualistic society that if you're strong enough, if you're powerful enough, if you're competent enough, you can somehow like brute force your way into systematic change. And I'm just here to burst your bubble about that, because systematic change absolutely necessitates collaboration at the deepest level. And that's why we should be working together as NGOs. We should be working across sectors. But it's challenging. It's really hard. There's a lot of obstacles to it. And that's why I want to get to the second point, and it gets back to culture. I look at the comparisons between traditional culture and our contemporary culture, and we have so many resources, right? We have so much capacity and technology and all this science and robots and drones, So there's this illusion that we can do anything with that, and yet we're struggling to put that all into effect in a way that actually reverses course and restores the biosphere and protects it. And yet you have like 80% of the world's biodiversity that's stewarded by traditional cultures, right? You have 40% of the remaining wildlands in traditional areas. And it's mind-blowing to me. I've been asking myself the question, why? And one of the hypotheses I've settled on, one of the distinctions between our culture and traditional culture, is the cornerstone role that ceremony plays in traditional culture. And the more time that you spend with Indigenous people, I feel like the more that you learn just how much of their life is involved in ceremony. For example, in the Yawanawa, when they make clay pots, it's all a ceremony. There's things that you do, there's prayers that you say, and you do this as a group. And then there's, of course, rites of initiation. Like there's so many ceremonies, and it's a group ceremony is kind of this beautiful oversight mechanism, because there's a group that you're making a commitment to in the ceremony, as you can make a commitment to the land, as you say your prayers to a wider reality. And those ceremonies are this beautiful, consensual, communal way of making a commitment and keeping it. And I wonder how our world would be different, and how our partnerships and our collaborations would be different if they started from a place of ceremony. And I don't know how you artificially, impose that, but I'm just wondering how we, as we consider rewilding of the land and the seas, how we can also rewild our hearts by maybe also considering the way we can restore ceremony into our culture in a way that reinforces our commitments as coalitions and communities, and helps us improve our actions across sectors.
I can answer many things to that, Amy. That's really great. I hope the audience will engage a little bit with this subject. I mean, at the end of the day, that is also the reason why we're here. This is why we're celebrating World Rainforest Day. This is the objective we had when creating this with Rainforest Partnership, is really to bring people together, to be able to discuss much more about this. Maria Jose, you brought up something also very important, which is competition. Competition within the same sector. And possibly that should be somewhat of a next panel, maybe next year. We'll see. Anyway, I'd like to go back a little bit. Lívia, you have something to say?
I would just add to the competition part. This is something that we face in the industry as well. So sometimes we as Lush, we want to do something that will be overwhelming, will be amazing, but we struggle because we're small. We need more players within the industry to support us to do that change that we want to do. And this is something that sometimes is a barrier. We cannot go any further than that. We need more companies joining us, but they see us as competitors. So how do we kind of break that chain and do things differently. I can say that we are already trying to, so yeah, let's hope.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly jump, because I love Amy's approach, and I think that this is something that I think it's important to acknowledge the barriers and the challenges, because I love the idea of being ceremonial, and I think that we see that constantly. These are lessons that have been taught to us for the working with communities, and sometimes we have to acknowledge that we're facing this urgent matter of saving the world, right? But there's no time to sit down and speak about it. So, for example, in communities, they have these assemblies. They sit down, they discuss the subjects, they take it like this, take it like this, like this. And sometimes we're so on this like Occidental world, being makers, being doers, that we don't have the time to talk, to discuss, to move it, to say, to see the solution, to understand. And I think that collaboration takes time, is what I want to say. And sometimes the same system we're embedded in does not allow us to have time. The competition it's rough out there, and I struggle with this. I am going to a workshop next week with a lot big players, and what I want to say is that I would just wish to have one thing that I can say we did this together. We just one. Let's try with that. But I feel that I like that ceremonial piece. I'm going to take you on that and maybe start with the ceremony. I think that, for example, the event in Montreal, the COP15 that happened some months ago in December, I think that those are moments in time where we are together ready to celebrate. But how do you maintain that energy forward? Because I think that those ceremonies happen like in big COPs, in big meetings like this. You said that, Tadzio, it's beautiful, these spaces that we create, but it's the work after that I feel that still needs to be a little bit more unpacked. How do we learn on how to take this forward? No, I'm just saying it, but I think that we're hitting like right on the nerve of some of the big challenges that we face to actually bring nature back.
At the end of the day, I think there's also a term that applies to this, and it's institutional egos as well. No? So I think we also have to find a way to get rid of these a little bit more. No? But anyway, I'm going to also try and go back a little bit to working with local communities. And Maria Jose, you brought up something right now that reminded me of something extremely important in your work. Me as Mexican as well, it's something that fascinates me, and I'm sure it does as well in your work. But I'd love for you to tell the audience a little bit more about the role in Mexico of the ejido. The ejido is this figure that probably doesn't exist in any other part. And it's very specific. It has its very own challenges, but it also has its advantages. So you mentioned the role of assemblies. The role of assemblies, gathering and deciding together. That's what the ejidos try to do sometimes. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, sure. So in Mexico, we have like three big ways of land tenure. We have private owned lands, and we have this structure called ejido that I'll tell you a little bit more. And we have communal areas, like community owned areas. And I think that the one that you might be referring more to is the latter. I think that within communal lands, we have these assemblies, we have these decision-making processes, and ejidos is back on the 1900s. We had the revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and when we fought, the winners decided we came from a big dictatorship, and the result of that war was to divide and to share the land with all the people who fought on that war. So they came up with this structure called ejido. And so that is why, as I was saying, 90%, a little bit more, is owned by people. There are very, very little federal land that are owned by the government. So this ejido that started in the 1920s, back in the 1990s, there was a reform because the ejido you could not sell. It was yours, given by the revolution, and then you could only just inherit to your kids. And of course, after some generations, it started to fragment, very importantly, the land. And in the 1990s, there was a reform that allowed ejidos now to be sold. So this has had huge impacts in the way that we work, because we are now facing with the challenge of very fragmented areas. We have municipalities, states like in Chihuahua, Oaxaca, where you have 500 different municipalities. It's a very big issue in terms of governance, of getting people together, agree on things. So I think that, but it's still, I think it's a great opportunity in terms that it is the owners of the land who can decide. And if you work with them and you enable them and provide them incentives, that you could create something that could enable nature to bounce back and to be able to provide what we call nature positive production. No, what we want to do, and I think that Lívia talks a little bit about that, is how do you produce and not only be sustainable or perform best practices, but you're actually enhancing the recovery of nature, the recovery of soil, the recovery of natural ecosystems, of ecosystem services, of wildlife. We have plots where we have jaguars coming in and going out and helping repopulate some areas that have been extirpated of jaguars. So ejidos become a crucial part. But as I said, they're tricky because at the end, they're heavily fragmented. You have what we call municipal commissioners, that they are only 3 years in term. And so it's very hard to do things in a 3-year term. But what I see also a very important aspect is the communal land that I mentioned. So communal lands, they're big plots of land. They cannot be sold, this on the contrary to other places. So this allows cohesion and decision-making bodies and strengthening the governance processes. Challenging situations, I believe that a lot of things can be seen very similar in Latin America and in other places. But as I said, if we fail to manage to provide clear incentives of keeping nature, I think we're going to be facing huge challenges. So over to, I don't know, Amy or Lívia, you want to go and reflect on that?
Well, I just want to get to the fragmented nature of the ejido, and since we spoke a little bit of collaboration, and also while doing this, acknowledge somebody in the audience, Rebecca Allen, who's one of the directors of the Andes Amazon Conservancy, and she's a role model for me, and the work that they do is fantastic. And I know that one of the challenges that she faces, one of the challenges I face, isn't just collaboration among, you know, this sector that's trying to create change from on high, but it's also fostering that collaboration at the ground level, between ejidos, between communities, and realizing that that is as much a part of conservation, right? When you're trying to protect an entire region, when you're doing what like Rebecca's doing, creating these eco-cultural corridors over, you know, hundreds of thousands of hectares, that means facilitating and fostering diplomacy between groups that have traditional rivalries, and there are still structural forces there that kind of encourage competition, just like there's structural forces that encourage competition for us. So this idea of building strength in numbers and basically getting a bunch of different overlapping groups, but also competitive groups behind similar values and similar actions, that is conservation work. That human work is conservation work. And we need to acknowledge that, because it takes so much time, so much energy. And the people who do it are just angels in my book.
Totally agree with that. And I think that it's important to acknowledge also that we are facing, as the digitalization starts moving forward to the communities, I am seeing a very big challenge in terms of this individuality. Like people are starting to become more and more alienated for the community aspect. And I think that this is another like horizon scanning already happening thing that we have to take into advantage. I'm seeing young people more alienated for the community processes because of the technology advance. Everybody is using WhatsApp now. They're looking into the individual self. There's this like weird sense of community around social, digital, but at the end, it's people by themselves and young people by themselves. So how do we are also using that? And I agree, working on social aspect is conservation. And I think is one of the key pillars on conservation. And if we don't are able to tap into that, we're going to fail. So Tadzio, you're here.
He's back.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for that little pause on my behalf. Internet's playing little games on me. Anyway, Maria Jose, thank you for that. I know speaking about the ejido is never easy, and trying to explain it in such a short time also. So I appreciate that. I mean, how can we say restoration and rewilding, which we haven't really spoken too much about rewilding, contributes to social well-being? We've spoken about the importance of having to work with communities and how there's no way around that. But how do we contribute to the social well-being of these communities as well by doing restoration and rewilding? I don't know who wants to go first.
I guess I'll just jump in. There's this interwoven system of traditional culture and an ecology, right? And the two kind of develop simultaneously, they co-evolve. And so if we want to support traditional culture, we need to support the ecology that supports it. And if we want to support the ecology, we need to support traditional culture. But I'm just thinking back to the pandemic, and with the Villanueva, for example, we're actually probably going to be dealing with some interventions here soon because of this. But their population actually kind of exploded a little bit during the pandemic because so many people returned to the traditional land. They saw it as a haven, and now they kind of don't want to go back out because they remember that their quality of life there is actually so much higher than it is kind of working in kind of degrading wage labor in an urban area that's very dirty. And so like the idea that for traditional communities, and I would say it doesn't just extend to traditional communities, right? Because you see this in North America, like all these people fleeing the urban areas and going to these rural small towns and becoming remote workers, and wanting to be closer to a place that's closer to nature. So I just want to throw that out as a data point because I think that there's a magnet that draws people back to the land in one way or another.
Yeah, I think that building up on that. Go ahead, Lívia. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that something that I've learned, and you guys can confirm that, even communities, people that are living on degraded areas, they are doing and they're living on those areas because they have to, because it's lack of money. They don't know other ways to have an income. So that's basically cutting trees or, I don't know, illegal animal trafficking or whatever. But when we give them that option of living on a restored land with beautiful forests behind them, close to them as their backyard, they are much happier. So I guess it's not kind of convincing, it's just giving an option, And the restoration work, once implemented, they are super welcomed by those people that were living in degraded areas. So it's not that they live there or they do that kind of traditional practice because they want to, but because they don't have any knowledge on other options, or they don't have other options. They don't seem to have other options. But when you give them those options by restoration and rewilding work and activities where they're living, I guess they kind of, it's automatic.
I just, yeah, totally agreed. I think that I just want to build on what Amy is mentioning around, and I think Lívia touched on that. It's we are constantly challenging. We have to be constantly challenging what we understand as well-being. No, so we have these GDP that it's all measured on money, on income, on security in terms of floor, things like that, housing. And we have to continue pushing forward to understand that the well-being is measured in so much other ways, many ways. Having been able to be in a stable climate, to being in access to nature. We know all these papers around being at least 30 minutes in nature helps you reduce cardiac problems, mental problems. And I think that the pandemic gave us a glimpse of what it is, but it's still I think we're failing to be able to face the challenges of modern development. I am one of these people who fled the city, Mexico City, and I'm living now in a rural area in Valle de Bravo, and I'm seeing the impact of having people living here. And we have to take it like with caution, the thing that they enjoy nature, but there is this constant, and talking about rewilding, I think that we have to address that there is, in general, from maybe urbanized people that come back to nature, there's this idea, or even in traditional communities, we have to acknowledge that there is a sense of nature versus people at some point. I'm telling you an example. Maybe having the forest and the fruit and the different resources that the forest provides, that's a good thing. But when you're talking about having your kids interacting with snakes, with jaguars, then we're talking about a very different thing. And we start to see conflict. And one thing that we are trying to push in WWF, but I think that this is something that we have to do jointly, is to understand how we can make peace with nature. How do we make true peace with it and go from man versus nature, trying to dominate it, to put a house on it, to put like how do you say, like when you put box spray and you want to like be with nature, but not nature in your house, right? So I think that what we can do and provide tolerance and empathy towards understanding that living in nature has its trade-offs. I think it's an important step that we're seeing. We're going to be failing on protecting the wildlife that we've been losing if we don't start investing on coexistence mechanisms, acknowledging that there is a gap. One thing I'll tell you, and then we can start for another question, is that we did an analysis in the Maya forest in Yucatan, Belize, and Guatemala around why are people killing jaguars. And what we found out is that the main driver are women. Women are telling their husbands, like, there is a jaguar out there, you have to kill it, and if you know, you're gonna sleep on the sofa because the kids are there and I don't want to see them playing. So the women are the first that put the position. We always thought that it was like the man, oh, I'm killing the jaguar, but it's more of a pressure of the woman taking care of the kids, their livelihoods, and having this long-term vision, saying you have to kill this predator that is going to eventually, and it's all because we have to work on understanding the role, the key role, the actual possibility of a jaguar attacking a person and things like that. But looking at those things, if we want to rewild and we start bringing jaguars back, we have to think about those trade-offs and understanding that these people can be afraid, and it can happen. So again, how do we? Sometimes we tend to romanticize the role of being in nature, and we have to acknowledge that there are trade-offs and things that the communities live every day, and the cost of living with these predators. We have to make sure that we develop the incentives to reverse the perception of that. Sorry, because
we do have the community, the groups, the people that already live in those areas and are used to live among jaguars or snakes or whatever. and those that are coming from the cities or more populated areas. So yeah, couldn't agree more.
I just wanted to jump on board what Maria said as well, and the dangers of romanticizing things. Sorry if I present things in rose-tinted glasses, but she's absolutely right. And interestingly, what she observed about jaguars and the drivers behind it are also things that we've seen in the Yawanawa community. But it's not just human-wildlife conflict, too. It's just the demands of having a population inside a natural area, and land, for example, will come under cultivation. So one of the things that we're looking at is how the political will is there in the community. We know that if they have the resources to cultivate less land and still meet their own needs, they would do that. So how can we support them in doing that? And so we're looking at permaculture trainings across all the villages, creating fish farms to reduce the pressures on biodiversity within the river, which is really their main source of protein. And so these are some of the things that we're looking at, like how can we make their lives with a couple of minor interventions more efficient, so that they can do a better job stewarding the forest.
Thank you, everyone. We've spoken a lot about, going to what Maria Jose just said about the pandemic making people leave the big cities and going to other places. But what about those who remain in the cities? Those who are used to, who grew up in the cities, who are still there, and who have very little connection to nature? How do we restore that connection with the urban side of things, which, as we know, in a few years, more than 70% of the population is going to be living in urban areas. So I think there's also the importance, as someone just mentioned also in the audience, the importance of speaking about the smaller actions. The big mammals, the jaguars, and so on is extremely relevant. But what about pollination? What about insects? What can someone do today in Mexico City or in New York or in Paris about restoration, about rewilding? I know it's not an easy question, but what do you think?
Can we say that maybe supporting organic practice is a way for people who are living in the big cities to actually support organic?
Definitely.
I think that one sometimes like unseen player within cities are the buffer areas and the natural areas around cities. Very few people know that the first protected area decreed in Mexico is right around the corner. Is the Desierto de los Leones, right? 100 years, the first one, and the role that these areas play on resilience, on climate mitigation, on event mitigation, it's crucial, and we are seeing the expansion of urban areas. I think that there is much to be done. I can share with you that we conduct a survey every 2 years on 8 mega diverse countries, and one of them is Mexico, and asking people, regular people, that are mainly in urban areas, if they know what biodiversity is, if they know the challenges that it faces, the importance to their regular livelihoods, and if they are ready to make a change in their day-to-day lives to do something about it. And the numbers are dire. Less than 8% of the people know what biodiversity is, and even a less percent are ready to do some change in their ways of being to do something about it. Sometimes it's because they don't know the unintended consequences of things like urban development. For example, I just have a friend who bought a house in Yucatan because Yucatan is super cheap. They cannot afford a house in Mexico City, and we are seeing a great extension, and we're looking at the depletion of one of the last lungs in Latin America being depleted because of land speculation and urban development. This is a person that works in WWF, and so it's very hard sometimes to match your day-to-day life and the challenges that you face in society, and try to match it with nature. And it could be, she could be using water bottles, she could be having a garden outside, helping pollinators, but at the end, she's going to put her resources into a place that is promoting deforestation in the Yucatan Peninsula. So I'm saying that it is hard. It is hard because small actions matter, but sometimes the drivers are just beneath us, over us. Sorry. So I'm saying I don't have an answer, but I think anything that you can do to inform yourselves of any decision that you have made, I think it's a right step towards a change. At least inform of the unintended consequences of your actions.
You almost gave me the goosebumps there, Maria Jose, because I'm sitting right now calling from the Yucatan.
I know.
And I see it. No, I see it. I see it, and I'm learning a lot about that, and also about what you were saying previously, which is we want to live in nature, but who's ready? I'm surrounded by a lot of people who don't agree with having certain animals around, and so let's take them out and so on. So it's a very complicated relationship, wanting to run away from the big cities and come and romanticize other places. Amy?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of cities, and we're seeing this all over the world, right? Like, I just heard something so disturbing a few weeks ago that in the UK, where they have these green bands around the cities and villages, that the Labour Party has promised that if they win the next election, that they will develop those green areas, which are, I wouldn't even call them too natural. I mean, from my point of view, coming from the Western Hemisphere, the UK is like a giant island garden at this point in time. But it's one of the few places where it's not as urban, right? And they have access to nature, but developing them for houses, because there's a housing crisis, and young people can't afford to buy houses. So I understand the impulse, and yet, that's the last of it essentially in the UK, and so many people will lose access to even the most minimal natural area at that point in time. And it seems like there might be other alternatives they would want to explore before doing that. Getting to what Maria said, there is a massive lack of biodiversity literacy. And what's interesting, and I think a challenge that like all of us in conservation every now and again get together over, adult beverages and lament, is this idea that in the climate space, like climate change has become kind of this household word and this household conversation, and everybody's talking about it, but we're not having the same conversation about biodiversity or mass extinction at this point. We know they're two sides of the same coin. They're part of the same system. And in fact, we cannot meet our climate targets if we don't preserve the world forest that we have now. I mean, research I've seen, and there's a range here, but our current world forest stores approximately 100 parts per million carbon. We're at 420 parts per million now. We can't exceed 450. And if even a fraction of those forests are to go, we blow through our climate targets, even as we are continuing to increase our emissions. So the nature could be our greatest ally. On the flip side of that, were we to rewild and restore, even the research I've seen is 1% of the planet. 1% of the surface of the planet, if we were to restore that to a wild state, we would, over the course of a couple of decades, remove all of the excess carbon that we've put into the atmosphere in the last century. So with just a little tiny effort in terms of boosting nature's power to support us, we could begin to slow and even reverse climate change. And yet at the same time, there's places like, the UK where they're just like, plow it under, build some homes.
I'd like to we have 4 minutes left, so we're going to have to start wrapping up. There's a fascinating subject I'd like to speak a little bit more, and goes to the comment of Lívia about the importance of food. And food is one of the main connectors, right, to the urban centers. Food is really what can help to tell a story of where that food comes from. Let's use avocado as the best example. Avocado in the US is consumed today probably like never before. Where does the avocado come from? What's the effect of the avocado? And so sourcing, it all goes back to sourcing. It all goes back, once again, to the conversation we also had yesterday, which is forest to table. So I think food, as part of biodiversity as well, is also a great possibility, to tell stories to the urban areas, to the urban cities, and so on. So I'd like just to make that comment added to what Lívia had just said at the beginning. I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention, any questions, maybe questions from the audience. I think we've had quite the amazing panel today. I mean, I really appreciate having the three of you. I think we had a great conversation. So please, if anyone has any more questions, or from the three of you, now's the time.
I would just say it's not a question, but if anybody in the audience or think they know a group that could be connected to Lush, the team here from the World Rainforest Day is allowed to share my email, my contacts, and I'll be very glad to be in contact with any of you. So feel free to reach me.
I will reach for you, Lívia.
Please do.
Thank you so much.
I've done some digging on Mexico, on projects in Mexico. I would love to talk to you about it.
I'll look for you very soon. Tadzio, thanks so much for having us here. I go inspired, motivated, sharing the panel with these two very strong, passionate women. It makes me feel very much enthusiastic of what comes, and we have to be hopeful. I think that the numbers are not good, but I think that being too immersed into how heavy the crisis we're in, it only takes us to inaction. I think we need to find, and I think that the restoration and the rewilding piece has that huge component of hope that we can, like Amy said, if we invest in nature, nature is not gone, nature is here. If we allow it with the knowledge that we have now to rebound, we have that solution there. And that gives me hope. Seeing communities, coastal communities, restoring mangroves, understanding that it is an investment for their future to be able to continue living where they live and not be hit by hurricanes. Things like that give me hope, and things we have to cling on those because it's a very complicated scenario. But I truly believe that if we were able to do this mess, we can clean it up too.
Thank you, Maria Jose. Thank you. A mention to the audience, a mention to the panelists as well. This conversation will be available afterwards online. So we'll be sharing that with everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again, and happy World Rainforest Day, guys. Thank you.
Happy, bye-bye.
Ciao.